Hi, I'm Taz from Taslima Maya Art. Welcome to my channel, and today we're going to be painting a beautiful sunflower in watercolours as a step-by-step beginner's tutorial. This week on the Art Train Collective we have the wonderful Kat's Fluid Art Creations up after me, and after her is Sheldon Briscoe with Shellrock Art. Do stay with us. And thank you to all of my wonderful Patreon and YouTube channel members for all your support to keep this channel going. So let's paint a sunflower with watercolours. So for this painting you'll need a few essential items, starting with some good quality watercolour paper, and this is an A5 sketch pad. I tend to tape down and secure my watercolour paper onto some card to make it more easily portable. This stops the paper from moving around when you're painting and gives you ease of access. You'll also need a mixing palette, a number of brushes, from fine detail brushes to a round or mop brush. You'll also need a watercolour paint set, and this can either be professional or student grade. And finally some clean fresh water. To start off the process I did a very rough sketch of a sunflower using a hard pencil, like a 2H pencil, on my 200 GSM watercolour paper. Don't worry, I'll be lightening these lines a little bit using my putty eraser, which is here, and I'm simply going to go over the lines and make them almost invisible to the eye, although I can still see them. This way, when I paint watercolours over the top, it tends to seal the pencil line in, so as long as I take most of the pencil line out I can still see the very faint lines underneath, and that's what I will use to guide myself with this painting. And this is a nice little trick for beginners who might be a little bit anxious about going straight in with a paintbrush, just to give you some guidelines to work with. Now for the first layer you'll notice that I watered down my yellow paint quite a lot because I wanted to go on very faintly, because I want the tips of my sunflower petals to be very faint and gradually get darker to an orange or a brown towards the centre. So I initially put down some water on my paper and then add some of the yellow pigment to it, and again it's very faint. So I'm making sure the tips of my petals are very faint, mostly water, and putting some of the yellow down next to it towards the centre of my sunflower. You'll notice that I've sped up this video by 2 to 3 times faster, just for convenience sake and to save time. But when you're actually painting it's very therapeutic. You can put some music on if you like and take your time with this as a beginner. I will gradually add more and more deeper colours. I'll go on to the darker yellow and then orange and then a little bit of brown towards the centre. So what I'm doing is I'm intensifying the colours by adding less and less paint, and I let the colours sort of flow into each other as well. And here I am doing the green for the stalk. I start with lighter colours every time and then I go from light to dark by adding more and more pigment to it and more deeper colours, and I make sure that it's not all one block colour. So I'm adding different greens to that stem and then different greens then wet into wet for the leaves as well, making them darker towards where they meet the stem. I really do love the wet and wet technique. It does take a little bit of time to master it, and often you can also wait for it to dry and then add another layer on top, and you can keep building up the layers that way. But at this point of time I'm just doing the base colours where I'm just adding the greens and then the lighter colours as well next to them, so they flow into each other and they start kind of, you know, creating this beautiful blended look. Now of course those of you who've been on my channel before will know that I'm quite new to watercolours, so I'm learning all the time and I'm learning from my mistakes or mishaps, and it's, like I said, very therapeutic and very enjoyable really, just to try and watch those colours flow into each other and see what it does. One of the earlier things that you might learn as a beginner in watercolours is that watercolours are transparent mostly. One of the defining features of watercolour paints is their transparency, and this allows the white of the paper to show through and creates the glowing, luminous effect that watercolour paintings are renowned for. So when painting a sunflower or botanicals, use this transparency to your advantage by layering each colour on the sunflower petals to create soft glowing effects. So my tip is to remember that the more water that you add to the paint, the lighter and more transparent the colour becomes, and the less water you add results in more saturated, intense colours. So as I'm wanting to create depth in the sunflower petals, I'm using more water for the lighter tones and less water for the dark areas like the base of the petals or the centre of the flower. Another tip for beginners is that there are 3 specific techniques you can use. For example, wet on wet is when you apply wet paint to wet paper, creating soft diffused edges. Wet on dry is when you apply wet paint to dry paper, producing sharper lines and more control. And then you have wet on damp, which allows for a more controlled but diffused edges or lines. So what you see me doing here is layering and glazing. I'm building up transparent layers of colour on top of one another, a technique called glazing to create depth and richness in my painting. I'm also layering lighter colours first, like yellow on the petals, and then adding darker tones like orange and brown to help me give my sunflower a sense of depth and dimension. Another tip for beginners is to try and control the water for better details. What I mean by that is that the amount of water you use can dictate how much control you have over the paint. Too much water can cause colours to bleed, while too little water can make the paint dry too quickly and be harder to work with. In terms of colour mixing within watercolour, watercolour paints are often mixed directly on the palette or even on the paper itself. You can mix different colours to create vibrant, rich hues. A good tip is to mix different shades of yellow, orange, and even a touch of red to get a natural gradient effect for the sunflower petals. For the seeds in the centre, you can mix browns, blacks, and even dark greens for a more realistic effect. Another thing to consider when doing your painting, and this can be of any subject, is the use of negative space. Negative space refers to the areas around and between your subject, which can be just as important as the subject itself in the watercolour painting. In this particular painting, I've left the majority of the background of the paper untouched, although you can put a light wash to represent the light background or green leaves around the sunflower, helping the flower itself to pop. In terms of drying time and how it affects the technique, watercolours can usually be reworked while still wet, but once dry they become harder to modify. Some artists love this challenge as it encourages spontaneity and fluidity in their work. So another tip would be to be mindful of drying times. Allow layers to dry between steps to avoid any unwanted bleeding, especially when working with intricate details like the sunflower seed pattern. The truth is that the soft, fluid nature of watercolours can be perfect for capturing the natural texture and lightness of a sunflower. Keep the strokes light and free to achieve that fresh, dynamic look. Although I use a more controlled approach with this particular painting, you can also do loose watercolour painting, which is a very different technique to this. And loose watercolour botanical painting is a genre of its own, worth having a look at if you haven't seen them. Now what you can see me doing is starting on the centre of the sunflower, so I am going to be using something known as negative painting. Negative painting is a technique where you paint around your subject rather than directly on it, so I'm leaving some areas of light where the paper is visible right in the centre, and I'm going around the edges there by darkening that with a darker shade of brown. So you will see lots of little light white reflective parts of the centre of the sunflower showing through. And I do this to give it some contrast. So with my brush I'm going in with various different colours in the centre. I'm using yellows and browns and some colours which I've custom mixed together, and I'm going to add a little bit of black as well in a moment. But honestly guys, I'm having so much fun with this, and this is my third painting in watercolour in this series, and it's the second flower that I've done, and you can see how I'm learning as I go on. I am waiting in between, so you'll see sometimes when the camera stops where I've actually waited and dried the area, because I don't want complete colour bleeding at times. I want some of those little dots to be very visible on their own without any bleeding. And this is the fun bit. I really enjoy doing the centre. Let me know down below if you enjoy watercolour and which particular techniques you like and why. I'd love to hear from you. Now a little birdie tells me that I'm likely to be getting or being gifted a set of professional watercolour paints in tubes. I'm not entirely sure which ones I'm going to get, but I will be doing an unboxing when I receive them. And I'm super excited about that, because the watercolour pan set you see there is not professional grade, and I really would like to try the professional grade and see what difference there is. And here is a nice close-up for you guys. I hope you like that. Now I'm going to go in with some Carinda Ash watercolour pencils to just give it a bit more depth in the centre. And these are watercolour pencils, so once I pop them on the painting, I can actually go in with a brush and smear them a little bit so they're a bit more blended. I have to admit I'm a lot more comfortable with pencils than I am with a paintbrush, but nevertheless I finalised my painting now by simply adding some water droplets in the background after finishing my last leaf, and I used the yellows and the greens for tiny little water droplets. And I also do a slight base on this by adding a little wash underneath the sunflower to give it some gravitas, as if it's sitting on something. So that is the final few touches. I hope you enjoy the rest. I'll let you listen to some music now, and we'll meet at the end to see what you think.
It's like we're running in circles, going around every day, getting stuck in the hurdles of yesterday. Don't you wanna go further, away from the fray? Let's not get stuck in our worries, we'll make our own way. Won't you come outside where the sunflowers bloom?
So my friends, after adding a very light wash at the base, that's my sunflower painting completed, and I hope you enjoyed this watercolour sunflower painting for beginners tutorial. If you liked it, please do consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell so that you don't miss out on future videos. I just want to take this opportunity to thank you all for being here and watching and supporting my channel. Just by watching, you're really supporting me, and I really appreciate it. So thank you very much, and I will see you on the next one. Up next will be the wonderful Cat's Fluid Acquations, and then Sheldon Briscoe or Shell Rock Art. So please do stay tuned. Thank you for watching. Bye for now.